Another exciting panel at Tabletop Squadron Con 2020. I know words. Um, right. Today we have Joe and Quinn Welsh-Wilson. They're going to be talking about Bleed. But first, go ahead and introduce yourselves and plug your content, please. Do it at the first, do it at the end. We love to hear about what you all are up to, and then you can jump into your presentation.
Okay. So I am Joe, and I play Lions on Arms of the Tide, and I was Goldie on Souls of the South, which are both actual play podcasts that were run by Quinn and are run by Quinn. I do a little bit on the Orpheus Protocol podcast, and mostly I try to retweet cute things. So
I am Quinn Welsh-Wilson, most notable for being Joe's wife. I also ran the Swallows of the South podcast. I run the Arms of the Tide podcast. I guest frequently as Granville Moore on the Actual Play podcast, the Orpheus Protocol. And you can find me and the host of the Orpheus Protocol, Rob Stith, talking about the wacky world of the CW's television show Riverdale on the podcast River Do's and River Don'ts. And I figure that's about as concise as I can be.
Quinn is on a lot. So we're here today to talk to y'all about Bleed, and so let's get started. This is our presentation, Bleed, a casual presentation on the emotions around play. Our presentation is going to cover three things, which are what is Bleed, how to handle Bleed, and using Bleed in actual plays or APs. Let's go. So what is Bleed? Bleed happens when emotions from one thing, such as play, carry over to another thing like the rest of the day. In the case of this presentation, we'll be talking about two types of bleed, which are bleed from daily life and bleed from the narrative. So bleed from daily life happens when emotions about things away from the table come into play. It's usually not intentional. And this can happen when somebody is having a bad day that causes their character to be shorter with people, or for them to have a disinterest when they were previously very engaged and invested.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it can also work the other way around. If maybe you're coming into something that's supposed to be like a pretty serious session of play and you are riding a high from something like something really good or exciting happens and you're like really, really bubbly, that would also be considered bleed. And sometimes it can just be like, if you're feeling depressed and you're showing up to play the game and maybe there wasn't like a specific inciting event, but that's the fact that you're having like a tough day with depression rolls over into the game. Like you think that maybe it's gonna wash away after a couple of minutes of play, and it just kind of doesn't. It sticks around, and you can't really like separate that from the experience of play and like the narrative or like the quote unquote immersion of the experience.
Which is to say, bleed is really frustrating. So that's why we're talking about it. So next is bleed from the narrative, which is probably the most common type of bleed that's discussed. People used to talk about it only like in the LARP space, where after you had a LARP, you would suffer from bleed sometimes, but it is in other things, which is why we're here talking about it. So bleed from the narrative happens when emotions from the game continue to impact a person after the session. Sometimes characters fight, and sometimes the players of those characters take the fight personally, which is understandable. It's still frustrating for everyone involved. And sometimes a character dies and it hits people hard, be they the listeners or the players.
Mm-hmm. And on that first one, it can actually kind of go both ways. It can be bleed from the narrative or bleed from real life. Like maybe if you're really frustrated with someone, for example, we play a lot of games with John, and for some reason, John is being I am uncharacteristically frustrated with John for some reason. I could decide, or I could engage in behavior at the table that is my character picking fights with John's character. Just because I'm having those frustrated feelings, and that would be bleed from real life. But if John and I got into a fight over the course of the narrative because that's what our characters were doing, and then I came out of that and like in the minutes, hours after the session, I'm just thinking about like, God, John, what a dick. Then that'd be more of a bleed from the narrative kind of thing. And likewise, it can go both ways. I think a lot of people actually aspire to, in some way, have people leave sessions with a more positive form of emotional bleed, to have that bleed over, like a really good high, like a nice joke that you end things on, like just feeling kind of like happy or good about things. That is seen, or can be seen, as desirable, whereas these more negative forms of bleed uh, are seen less so, because they're kind of a drag.
Yeah, no one wants to be sad after they just played a game with their friends. So how to handle bleed from daily life. Naturally, there isn't a one-way works for all, and so here are some things that I'd recommend trying out. Checking in. It sounds really simple, but a lot of people forget that it's important to check in on how people are feeling. Just seeing how people are doing is important. Be empathetic. Having a set talk time can be really important as well, because it lets people have that moment of getting out what's happened about their day, and also tells them that, like, hey, in 20 minutes we're going to start playing, so like the things that need to get out, let's vent them out, and then get the show on the road, or game. Another thing is to play a short improv game beforehand, which Quinn knows oodles and oodles about, and accept that maybe you don't get to play every time. It can be frustrating to show up to a game like ready to play and you super want to, but one person is super frustrated, and let's face it, there's a lot to be frustrated about right now. And it's important to let that person have time off, like whether this is for an actual play or it's for just y'all having fun and playing together and hanging out. It's important to be there for your friends and for your fellow cast members. And it's much better to take that week off and just have everyone chat or check in and have a calm, cool, collected time, or a time full of venting, than it is to make somebody go into a game with all of their feelings of frustration, because it's just going to pile on. Any failure that they get is going to add to those feelings, and then they're going to have bleed from their daily life that came into the narrative that will carry out and leave them further frustrated.
Yeah, definitely. And something that I think is important to emphasize here is that some of the way that I view playing a game, and like that the whole process of like playing a role-playing game, is that you are consenting to like an emotional experience. You're consenting and entering into something that is going to make you feel things. So engaging in a role-playing game, having a session that makes you feel things, is normal. Some people might say it's even the point of doing it, in some ways. But then when you're getting this crossover, it's like, what I want to be doing is having a good time, and I can't have that good time right now. So like, can we maybe reschedule this? I think is a reasonable request to help everybody get what they want out of the game, and like out of that experience, as well as just being something that is trying to attend to the emotional consideration and well-being of the people that you're playing with. And I think that those check-ins are really important. One thing that I often say about check-ins is that you should probably do them a little bit more than you feel like is necessary, just in terms of making sure that everybody feels like they're on the same page, or that everybody feels safe to talk about things, that you have this genuine desire to know how people are feeling and doing, and to like hold that in consideration through the process of deciding if you're going to be entering into playing a game today, or if you maybe need to back out or change some things as you're going through the process of play itself.
And just to be perfectly clear, this doesn't fall all on the facilitator or game master or storyteller. It is everybody in the party is responsible for doing this, because everyone in the party is responsible for telling the narrative. And hopefully y'all are friends.
Right, yeah. Like, hopefully there's a mutual respect and appreciation for other people and their experiences that should be undergirding this. It's not something that should be done with an assumption or presumption or like undergirding of authority. It's not something that's like, I'm being the parent and I have to make sure everything's going right. It's like, no, I care about you. Like, let's do this.
To be fair, I am the parent, but also I care about you. So how to handle bleed from the narrative. Again, I'm so sorry, but there isn't a one-way works for all. And so here are some other things to try out. So one thing that you can do that's really easy is to just talk about what happened. Like, especially if people have cried in the session, talking about why, or like the things that led to the person crying. are important. Like, we tell stories where we make you laugh until we make you cry. And it's really important for us as people to check in on the people we're recording with after someone has cried and make sure that they're really okay. Like, it's terrible, but player character is leaving now because the player has other things that they need to be doing. And it sucks and it's harmful, and there are external emotions in that and not just the narrative. And that's part of why it's important to talk about what happened.
And something that I'll add to that point now is that sometimes, because emotions are complicated, social dynamics are complicated, our experience, like our lived experience as human beings, can be complicated and messy. People might not always be ready to talk about what happened right after the fact. And so it is often very important to talk about what happened, because you want to make sure that you're engaging in like safe behaviors, caring for the emotional well-being of other people. But sometimes people might say, like, I don't know, or I can't talk about this right now. And it's really important to respect that, while also holding space for circling back to that conversation and checking in from a place of genuine curiosity and empathy at a later time.
Another thing that you can do is have a wrap-up activity. Yes, very simple, but it's great. And the wrap-up activity could be anything, really. You could play like a short other game that does not have a lot of intense emotions. You could play War, which is a card game that, despite the fact I love card games, I know almost nothing about except that you slap cards, I think.
Yeah, you could play some Mario Kart.
Yes, because there are no emotions around Mario Kart at all.
Well, look, it's better than Smash Brothers.
This is true. You can also give an acknowledgement to other people at the table. An example is, I loved when player A did cool thing. My probably like biggest example is that I have the privilege of getting to record with Alan Sells on the Orpheus Protocol podcast. And basically after every session, I tell Alan, oh my God, I love it when Rhett did blah, which was super like in character or empathetic. And the Orpheus Protocol, for those who don't know, is a horror podcast. So things get intense. And having those little moments with Alan of being able to be like, you were so awesome, help me like leave and then go to sleep, which is a thing I need to do to come back and play again. And then this is something that Quinn is fantastic at, and I love getting to play games with my wife, and it is checking in during play.
Yeah, and like I was saying before with check-ins, it's that same principle of continue that check-in from the start through the process. And sometimes people find it useful or helpful or desirable to be like, no, like I want to be feeling this way right now. Like I think that it is appropriate that I'm feeling sad or whatever. And like it is part of that experience that I'm consenting to in playing the game, that I'm feeling this way right now. It's not something that I'm uncomfortable with. So like, no, we can move forward. Or on the other hand, it might be the opposite of that, of like, no, like this is bringing up some stuff that has to do with like some other stuff that's going on in my life right now, or some stuff in my past. And like, I can't handle this right now. I can't really do this right now. So can we take a step back? And again, it's all about that genuine curiosity. It's about that genuine care. It's really important, I think, to emphasize when you're talking about this stuff with people, that when you ask that question, and if their answer is something is going on, what's happening is not that they're getting in the way of play. Because from my perspective, play as it should be can't happen if something is getting in the way. It can't happen if someone is not in that space where they want to be. And like, it's a little bit different if you're just like kind of feeling like, I'm not so sure about today, but like a strong emotional reaction or something, a very strong experience. You don't want to like press someone in through like social pressure to be like, no, just like continue on, keep going. And so I think it's really important that it is understood and really clear at the table that the point of these questions isn't how do we get back to playing the game as fast as possible. It's I care about you. I want to know how things are going. And I just want to make sure that like if there's anything that we need to do or that you want to talk about, that we take the time and hold the space for that.
I had a thought and it was good and then I forgot it. Safety tools. Yes. To anyone who thought that the check-in process sounded like safety tools or the X card, that's in part because those things help like mitigate bleed, and they also like help people be safe. It's important to know the triggers of the people around you if they're willing to share it, but nobody has to disclose that to
Mhm.
you. And it's not a fault on you as a person if someone doesn't want to disclose that. Like, that's their business. And if something comes up and you see a reaction or think that something is up and you do a check in, it varies by person if they say, no, I'm fine, to either mean like, I'm not okay, like ask me again and I'll yield, or no, we need to keep on going and I need to push through this, or like if they say stop, obviously stop. And that's a thing that can be hard to learn. And as you are more empathetic with people and as everyone at the table learns more about each other, these are things that will help you like figure this out together as a group.
Mm-hmm. And in regard to that safety tool thing, that check-in process is to me something that is foundational to what I call cultivating a culture of safety at the table. And it's that culture of safety that allows for those tools to be used, and sometimes for you to have conversations outside of those tools that facilitate like the safety and well-being of everyone at the table.
So using bleed in actual plays. There are different ways that you can use bleed in your narrative naturally. For example, when things are heavy, you can choose to cut jokes to keep the mood in, or you can leave jokes in for some release. And you cannot do an outro on a particularly heavy episode so it sits with people longer. This is especially true if you have like a lighter sort of outro where you're like, any form of cheering and happy and providing release to people in a very tense moment.
It is very strange to have this like heavy moment sit and then to have the audio kick up at the end and say like, "What's up, ghouls and goblins? Don't forget to hit the bell and touch the thumb."
Not at all speaking from personal experience.
And something else here that I think, if we're going to talk about some of the stuff that we've been engaged with, I think that Rob does this really well in the editing of the Orpheus Protocol, is he uses music in a way that underscores these emotional moments, but then that also he uses like leitmotifs, these musical themes that when they show up, they can help like bring forward some more intense emotional experiences. But you also do want to be mindful of, especially as you're like leading out of the episode, the space that it might be leaving people in.
And we have another slide on this, which is if you want to increase the chance of people feeling warm and or lighthearted, you can do the following. Because, you know, if we're going to tell you how to make things more serious, the least we could do is also how to tell you to make them more digestible. And one of the things is something Quinn has mentioned before, which is making sure that you end on a good joke. A good joke. I'm not talking like some nonsense pun where my depression dog named Lion says they're ready to roar, but an actually good and one that like it makes the table laugh or it makes people pause, and choosing to like leave that laughter in can also sometimes help people be lifted out. You can add a blooper from the episode, and in your outro you can wish people well, even though the outro is not something that was like part of the narrative. It is something that's part of the product. And with AP, that's something to be mindful of. Like, wishing people well sounds really simple, and hopefully these other things do too. But it's nice, especially in these current times, to know that someone is thinking of you or wants you to be safe. And some of that is like parasocial stuff, where people feel like really close to creators of the content that they consume. And that's brilliant in some places. But it feels like a friend telling you that, like, I hope you have a great day.
Yeah. Yeah. And parasociality can be fraught as well sometimes. It depends. But definitely, I don't think that you're like at risk of cultivating like a strange or like toxic relationship with a fandom if you say like, I hope you have a great day. And in terms of that idea of ending on a joke, this is something that I actually brought in to Swallows of the South when we were running that show, we had a segment at the end of it called Lunch at Madame Faye's that showed up about midway into season 1 when things started getting like really intense and heavy. The entire show had shifted from like relatively lighthearted to like some really intense drama. And I was reaching the end points of these episodes where, sort of on that same principle of end on a good joke, you want to end on like a strong dramatic moment. And I was realizing, yeah, these are good dramatic moments, but it's kind of a bummer. And so we took this thing that we were doing as a warm up for the show, which is just like a short in character interaction at like an in canon tea house where they just get together and they'd have like lunch and talk with an NPC. And we just started spinning that into the end of the episode. So it might end the primary narrative on this heavy thing, but then here's like, oh, here's like a little extra thing for you to go out on that is a lot more fun and lighthearted and is always structured to end on a good joke.
So finally, on using Bleed in actual plays, there are so many examples of how to utilize Bleed. So go out there and find what works for you and your media. 2 examples that we're going to talk about are 448 Psychosis. To those of you who don't know, it is a play with very heavy themes. And I had the experience of going to see one when I was a college student. And what happened at the end of the play is the stage lights went off and the curtains closed. There was no curtain call, and they just opened the doors and lit enough lights for us to leave. And they left us with that. And I went to see the play with one of my parents, and we sat in silence for most of the car ride, kind of just stuck in the headspace of all of that material. And it wasn't until we were almost home, like we'd gotten off the highway, that we finally started to talk about what happened. And the first thing that I said was, I can't believe they let it end that way. Because I was really stressed out.
Mm-hmm. And on the other side of leaving people feeling like a little bit different is Haikyuu, which, if anyone doesn't know what Haikyuu is, it's an anime show about a boys' high school volleyball team, and it's really, really good. And the thing about this that makes it like a bleed-oriented thing is the show is generally structured in a way that conveys this like deep love and abiding excitement about the sport that it's about, and that's really infectious. So almost universally, we will watch an episode of Haikyuu. That's like that sentiment is infectious, and so is our affection that's been fostered for the characters. That it's almost impossible for us to exit an episode of Haikyuu feeling worse than we went into it. So it always sort of serves as a pick-me-up because of these like emotional responses that it's evoking, and so that sort of carries with us out of the activity. And that is a form of bleed as well.
I was actually sick this past week, and we are on our 4th watch of Haikyuu, and we had been working to only do about like 3 episodes a day or so, but I was sick, and so I was miserable and very sad. And needless to say, we basically binged it again. Because I needed that pick-me-up, and I needed something that was going to lift me up and help me get through the rest of the day at work, because I was so exhausted. And even though I wasn't able to go out and exercise or go on our walks like we normally do, just watching Haikyuu was so helpful to my mental state. And, you know, gotta love those boys. They're great kiddos.
Mm-hmm.
Volleyball, I've had the questions up, but I haven't been able to see them. So we're going to go through and answer them now, starting with what's volleyball. Volleyball is a sport. I'm really tempted to make Quinn go get our volleyball. But basically, 6 people on each side of a net that is about almost 8 feet tall, because it's like 7 feet and 11 inches tall have to like hit the volleyball over the net and get it to land on the other people's floor, their court. And so you basically have 3 like taps of the ball to get it over to the other side in hopes that it goes over. This is not a very good explanation. I was not prepared to explain volleyball.
Okay, I'm not sure if that was an entirely serious question about volleyball.
I don't care. I love volleyball. Okay.
The most important part of volleyball is that you never give up.
Yes. And also an amazing thing about Haikyuu is it's very good at building tension in something. It's in part because the mangaka used to do horror work, and so if you would also like to learn about building tension up, that's a fantastic resource.
Horror and comedy are the 2 best places to learn about building tension.
They are. Somebody says, how do I make good jokes? Listen to Cameron is actually really great advice. Another way to make good jokes, follow your instincts, you know, and like if you're gonna punch up. That's all good.
Yeah, for sure. Know your audience.
Yes, yeah, know your audience is another one.
Usually that'll mean friends. Just like try to make your friends laugh.
Yeah, and another thing is that like the jokes aren't dependent on just you. Like to make a good joke, you can also rely on other people at the party. Like sometimes it's a matter of like somebody is the straight man and someone is the funny man, and like that is the joke.
Unfortunately for us, we are neither.
This is true. One of us is a crop top NB and the other is a button-up NB, so it's a similar thing. Culture of safety is important. I'm trying to find questions, I swear.
And if you have any new questions, you can filter them in.
Yes.
Yeah, so we've gone through the chat log.
If I missed your question, please just type it again. I'm so sorry. Somebody says, what is straight?
Well, my mind was still on volleyball, so I thought that was what is a straight.
Yes, it's a very different thing. We could answer that one, though. Can you yell rolling? Rolling Thunder!
Good.
Nishinoya is a very good boy. Okay, there are no new messages, and so yeah, thank you all for having us. It was really fantastic to be here, and you know, if you have questions, like feel free to tag me at least.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. You can follow us on Twitter. We do have Twitter handles that I don't think we plugged.
No. So you can find me at Fallon_Farone, which is falling without the G _41.
And you can find me on Twitter at MonkeyPieQuinn. That is MonkeyPiQuinn. And whatever it is you do, please don't forget to touch the thumb.
You do, consider looking at Arms of the Tide, which is our actual play podcast where I play a flammable plant wolf with depression. We have a lovable robot with a heart of gold and a million cats. And I can't give spoilers away, but we also have Chanel, who is an amazing performer and
honestly one of the most talented comedians I've ever had the pleasure of working with.
We have the pleasure of also recording with John from System Mastery and occasionally guesting on that podcast. And there are some times where John and I just sit back or else have to cover our mouths and attempt to not have our laughter picked up on the mic because Chanel has just murdered the entire room with a bomb joke. As in, the joke is amazing, not a joke about a bomb. I don't think we've had any of those yet. Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We hope that you learned something. I don't know how to end this, Hudson, please.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so